I'm still thinking about understandings of knowledge, epistemologies, and what kind of images we have in our head when we recognise knowledge as being valid, and how it's constructed and so on. And I spent a bit of time critiquing kind of foundationalist epistemologies, which is this idea I've said, that knowledge builds on solid foundations in the same way that a piece of architecture is built on solid foundations. And then there's things that come along with that, which are it's useful, but there are things which are problematic. For example, I've mentioned load bearing. The foundations of a house have to be load bearing because you have to take the weight of the house throughout its entire construction. You can't take away the foundation without the house falling down. But that's not true for knowledge. You can indeed build very complex edifices of knowledge and then discover that that the things you found out first, what you might call the foundations, were wrong, so you take them out and put new ones in. You can do that. I've also talked a little bit about epistemologies based on the idea of a journey. I mentioned evolution in that. Evolution is often considered to be a process by which knowledge is arrived at through converging lines of inquiry, as the phrase is usually put. You find out about the truth and validity of evolution not because there is a single foundational fact, because there's dozens of facts, all of which progress along these different routes and seem to be convergent upon a singular set of explanations at the end, which we call the theory of evolution. And again, there's no one foundational fact which supports evolution. Even if it wouldn't happen, but even if it was discovered tomorrow that, that there's some stuff to do with the way that genes work was fundamentally flawed, it wouldn't make that much difference. It's the other lines of evidence are so strong. If it was discovered that 3/4 of the fossils in existence were all fakes, again, it wouldn't be. It still wouldn't make a difference because there's lots and lots of other convergent lines of evidence. You'd have to disturb an awful lot to really think this map is completely wrong. You'd have to go a long way to do that. So you got these foundational ones. You've got ones which are non-foundational, like the mapping one. But the one I quite like, I can't remember the name of the person who came up with this, but I'll find out and put it in the description box. The one I quite like is a model that's based on the image. And these are all just images, of course. It's based on the image of the crossword puzzle. I used to love doing crossword puzzles. I used to do the Cryptic crossword in the Guardian every day. I haven't done it for years. But crossword puzzles. Because crossword puzzles are interesting, aren't they? Because you've got all these clues and you've got all these spaces to put clues, and all the answers to these clues all intersect with one another. So the more you fill in of a crossword, the more coherent it becomes, the more it all kind of supports one another. So for example, let's say you're doing a crossword. And there's this clue, it says 3 letters, it says domestic animal, like Phoebe here, she's so patient. 3-letter words, domestic animal. So you put, probably a dog, so you put dog. I think I better just check that. So you look for one of the down clues, and there's a word, it says, let's say 5-letter word beginning with D, it says, I'm just thinking about dogs, how pets end their life, it'll say. So I think, it must be death, obviously, because all pets do end their life in death, don't they? And that makes sense, because there's a D from the 3-letter crossword, dog, 5-letter word going down, beginning with D, how pets end their life, dog, death, so you can put the death in. And then you do all the rest of the clues, and you slowly build it up, and they're all intersecting with one another, and the whole thing is making sense. It's not making sense in the way that the building makes sense, from the ground up, with the first one being carefully constructed. And it's not making sense in the way that the map is making sense, where all these lines are converging to particular points. It's making sense in the way that the crossword puzzle is making sense. Where they all support one another. It becomes coherent. I think it's sometimes called Coherentist epistemology. But either way, it all becomes coherent. And the key thing about that is that it's not foundationalist in the sense that the first things that you put down, the first facts that you find, you can actually be proved wrong in that. I mean, it might be that you come round a little bit later on while you're doing your crossword puzzle, and the G in the word dog the first clue that you filled in, intersects with a word that you're really sure about, but the G doesn't make sense. It has to be a T. You go, oh shit, because it's a T. But it can't be a T because I've got the word dog. Oh, 3-letter domestic animal, probably cat. So you change the dog, first one you put in, you write cat. Think, well, death must be wrong. How do pets end their life? Well, they end their life. It's got a T later on, isn't it? It's got a, because I put death. They end their life in a crate. Oh, okay, so pets end their life in a crate. Now that makes sense. So you've changed the first things you put in there. It's coherent with everything else that you know that you found out. You found out later knowledge, and you reviewed earlier knowledge in the light of later findings. But the whole thing still makes sense. It's still coherent. And of course, at times, you know, when you're doing a jigsaw puzzle, when you're doing a crossword puzzle, and if you do crossword puzzles, you'll know this. Sometimes you find that, you know, a really substantial part of it was just wrong. You know, a word that you put in and 4 or 5 other words that intersected with that word are all wrong, and you have to rewrite that whole section of the crossword puzzle. It's like a paradigm shift in scientific terms. You know, you've had to rewrite a whole part of that puzzle, but the whole puzzle is still holding together. Other parts of the puzzle hold it together. It would be rare to the point of impossibility if every single answer that you put in the crossword puzzle was wrong. It all made sense, it all linked up, you know, all the words crossed over perfectly, but all the answers were wrong. That would be, the chances of that happening are vanishingly small, yeah? So, no, the fact that it's coherent adds kind of confidence that the answers are probably right. But it's always possible that some of them may be wrong, and you might have to get the rubber out and get rid of some and put some others in. Because some of the questions life asks are cryptic, aren't they? You know, cryptic. They're not obvious. It's not as obvious as domestic animals, 3 letters, D or G or C-A-T. They're cryptic. And you have to kind of infer the answer, and it's a little bit tentative, and you might be wrong. And you might have to go back to some of that stuff. Some of it you can be pretty confident about, but you can't be absolutely confident about any of that stuff. Crossword puzzles. Yeah, that's all I like right now.